going to introduce our next speaker. He's someone I've interviewed many times over the years and got to know well, so I know you're going to be interested in what he has to say. So he's a good northerner, he doesn't waste words. So Kevin Hollinrake, of course, is the Shadow Secretary for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, and of course a lot of you will know him from his professional pre-political career because, of course, he founded and built up Hunters over the years. So, Kevin, it's a great pleasure to have you here, especially, and it's a really busy day today because we've had the assisted dying debate in the Commons as well. So normally MPs would be back in their constituencies on a Friday. So busy weekend for you, I guess, as well, Kevin. Yeah. Let's start with the Renters' Rights Bill, which Labour are pushing through, obviously of huge interest to everyone in the room. How significant to you are the differences between what Labour is proposing and what you were looking at doing?
Well, in terms of what Michael Gove was going to do, of course, in terms of, I mean, the most contentious part of it, of course, is the abolition of Section 21. And I was a backbencher at the time when that was going through, and so I didn't have the collective responsibility of being in Parliament, and, of being a minister and having to follow the kind of company line on it. So I was against the abolition of Section 21. I spoke out in Parliament against it. It'll be interesting to see how we develop our own policy in terms of that. But again, Kemi Badenoch, our new leader, has already said she thinks it could break the property market rather than assist it. So as people in this room know, Section 21 it was vital in terms of encouraging supply. So when I started in the business back in the early 90s, if you wanted to rent a house in York, as I was an estate agent back then, it was pretty dark, dank, shabby, kind of two-bed terrace. There was very little choice because you couldn't get tenants out. In fact, back then, if you wanted to get a tenant out because you wanted to reoccupy it or sell it, you had to buy a new house for them to live in. It was as serious as that. Rent controls in place, and we just don't want to see it go back to that position. So then we've got the Housing Act. Margaret Thatcher brought that forward, and Section 21. So it's about supply, and the ability to get a tenant out of the house means investors are more comfortable investing. And it obviously goes back to property rights. So, and I think the particularly difficult situation is for very small landlords who have more than probably 5 or 10 homes, because if you get one tenant in there who's not paying you, it's taking months to get them out. That's a very, very damaging situation for that particular landlord. So our position, we haven't firmed up yet. Obviously, Michael Gove thought differently and thought we should abolish Section 21. I'm less certain about that, and certainly whether there can be some exemption for smaller landlords in that space. So yes, we go there at our peril, and similar things in Scotland where you'd seen a kind of a 13% reduction, I think, in supply following their similar introduction of the provisions in Scotland. So, yeah, we've got real concerns about it, like many people here probably have. It's
going to be inflationary for rents.
Yeah, of course. You reduce supply and demand. Nobody's really repealed yet the law of supply and demand, and so you reduce the supply, the demand relative to that is going to be higher, and that's going to push rents up.
One gets the sense that a lot of Labour backbenchers in particular are not particularly well disposed to the private rental sector.
Well, I'm sure that's right, and to a certain extent, I think anybody who understands the private renting sector knows most landlords do a fantastic job, and the supply, the availability is because landlords are competing for tenants, and that's the reality behind this, which is why these landlords are operating on pretty low yields, so 4 or 5% most of the country, probably 2 to 3% in central London. So this is not a big return on investment. Certainly in terms of the income yield. So people need to understand that. And the vast majority of tenants are happy with their landlord and happy with the terms of their contract, of course. So again, you destabilize that at your peril if you're trying to fix a problem that is quite a small problem in terms of the context of the overall market. It's what you lose in the process. That's the concern. So, we at the legislation going through Parliament now, as you know, we've had committee stage. We We tabled amendments, things like introduction of fixed-term tenancies as an option for tenants, and that's something that's available to tenants in Europe, as well as having longer-term tenancies generally. So we think there are mitigations that could be put in place that would temper some of the worst effects of the legislation, and we should definitely consider that, because if you cut off supply, it'd be bad for tenants, and that's what we should be worried about. I think everybody can see it's right to try and give tenants a bit more security, especially if you're in rented accommodation for the longer term. But doing it in a way that's going to cut off supply, particularly for smaller landlords, and that should be our base. You know, my background is small business, and started a small business which we grew over time, and we should always look after that part of the marketplace. We don't want to drive small landlords out the market and just hand this over to your L&Gs and the Grangers and the Fizzy Livings, these kind of people. They do a great job, but there should be opportunities for smaller landlords to get in on the action too.
I was struck by something you said a moment ago. Potentially there might be exemptions carved out for the smallest landlords. Do you get the sense that Mr. Pennycook, your opposite number, is particularly well disposed to that kind of thinking?
No. Definitely not. And yeah, let's be honest about this. You know, they've got a 160-odd majority. All the stuff we propose is going to be voted down. In reality, there might be more success in the Lords, and so there may be some amendments that may be accepted, but there'll be tweaks rather than fundamental changes. So, and it's been brought in under primary legislation. So, from my perspective, I don't know if it's shared widely in the audience, but I look forward to trying to get back into government in 2029. There are some things we can reverse quite quickly. Some of the employment rights stuff will be introduced via secondary legislation. We could reverse that quite quickly, because some of those things will be very damaging too, in my view. But this is primary legislation, so once it's in, it's not easy. It's all possible, but it's slower to reverse it. Yeah,
you made a very good point there about small businesses being the sort of backbone of this industry. I mean, there is consolidation going on. Do you feel that that's a sort of inevitable one-way street, that the big are just going to get bigger and the little guys there's going to be fewer of them?
Well, I think this is one of the industries that is not actually, hasn't been taken over by all the big guys. You look at the market share of the bigger estate agents, the market share isn't growing. The independents have always been very successful in this marketplace. So, and competition we should welcome. And one of the things you'll see from Kemi, and something I fully support, is the best regulatory competition. What can we do to make it easier for people to start up in business, not make it more difficult? And regulation can be appealing. I know the industry, you know, we've got Roper to talk about all this kind of stuff, but it can be appealing because it's a barrier to entry for us. But in terms of what's right for the consumer, that's a different thing altogether. And we, I think, as parliamentarians, and I think in the industry, have got to try and engender competition, because that drives the best outcome for consumers, and it gives people confidence that capitalism's working, and there are some concerns right now.
So, I'm going to ask you to put on your old industry hat, see if you can still hit some of those notes. I mean, would you want to be an agent in this market with this sort of legislation coming down the line?
Well, everything's an opportunity. It wouldn't put me off getting into business. To be honest, with all the things that are coming down the track, I think the employment rights bill is something that puts me off more than anything. I did say something a few weeks ago. You know, all my life I've wanted to be in business, and I've always started and tried to start and grow businesses to various degrees of success. But of all the things that would put me off right now, it's things like employment rights on day one. I think that's more damaging. I think the people here will cope with the new regulations. I think it's the smaller landlords I'm particularly worried about, which feeds supply. So I think the economy is going to stay pretty strong. The fundamentals were good, whatever Labour said when they took over. But you know, in terms of interest rates are falling, inflation's down at the right level, back to 2% region again. We were the fastest growing economy in the G7 for the first 2 quarters. We're not now, and that's part of just talking the whole market down, the whole economy down. So yes, I think the people here will cope with it, but we as parliamentarians shouldn't be just looking to throw things down the track that you can cope with. We should be trying to improve outcomes for the people who are looking to rent properties, buy properties. That's fundamentally where we should be at. And and also engendering competition within the industry, because again, that's good for consumers.
Yeah, I mean, obviously a lot of the lettings agents will be very concerned about the ending of fixed term tenancies and the loss of those renewal fees that they get.
Well, I think and that's not good for consumers either, because Labour's tightened up some of the provisions in terms of when you can serve notice because you want to reoccupy the house or sell it. But nevertheless, that can happen. And if somebody, rather than have a 3-year tenancy, for example, fixed term, after a year, you can serve that notice, that person's out after a year and 4 months. So, that can't be good for tenants if they've got no security of tenure, which they haven't at that point in time. The current situation protects them more effectively than that. So whether this actually works in practice or whether it's too ideological. So again, we're going to push back and say, fixed term tenancies, this is something you should consider because it's in the interest of tenants as well as potentially in the interest of landlords and therefore supply.
Let me sort of flip it around slightly. I mean, rightly or wrongly, you will be seen with your business background as someone who is going to be a champion for the industry. What would you say to someone, perhaps on the Labour side, who'd say, well, he's just the estate agents guy, we're sticking up for everyone, renters in particular?
Well, this is a knowing game. You know that whatever you do, you'll get criticised by somebody. So you just got to do what you think's right. And to say it's wrong for us to be on the side of the industry, of business, I think is wrong too. We shouldn't be exclusively on the side of business, but nor should we exclusively be on the side of tenants. And I think that's what I would perceive. I think we try to strike a balance in government, be on the side of workers and employers, be on the side of tenants and landlords, because there's a symbiotic relationship. So I can cope with the criticism, but we should never forget how important this voice is in these conversations. And the best reminder of that is Churchill when he said, some people see private enterprise as a predatory tiger that needs to be shot. Some people see it as a cow that they can milk. Few people see it for what it really is, and that's a strong horse that pulls the whole cart. Yeah. There wouldn't be any public sector if it wasn't for the private sector. And that goes for the people here and landlords. It's hugely important that investment goes in. If the government expects people to invest and get no return, there will be no investment. That's the reality. So there's got to be a return at the end of it. And if you want, the government again talks about stability a lot, and that's absolutely right. Stability will deliver growth as long as the rules are fair. But if you keep changing stuff, that's not stability. Yeah. And there's lots of changes happening right now. The pregnant pause we had before the budget for 6 months about, oh my God, all this stuff's going to change. And then 25 billion a year in terms of tax rises to employers' national insurance, and the Employment Rights Bill, as well as things like this, are all destabilising factors rather than stabilising.
And obviously one of the government's big targets is 1.5 million new homes over the course of this Parliament. You didn't achieve it in your time in office. Do you think they have any sort of chance at all of achieving it?
No, I don't actually. I think it's very, very unlikely. Actually, if you look over the last 10 years, and this is something that Ed Conway from Sky has been clear about. If you look at the period between 2013 2023, which is the last full year we have on record, housing delivery, new housing formations over that 10-year period is the highest in the last 50 years. High on average, higher even than the 1970s, which is seen as like the golden age of house building. And there was a lot more house building then, but there's lots of clearances too. So the net housing formations has been very high over that period of time in relative terms. Now, you can easily say it wasn't enough, and in terms of being ambitious about building more, I'm not against that at all. But from a start where you're probably at 210, 220,000 homes a year, to get to 1.5 million, so to get to 300,000 homes a year, that's a big ask. Matthew Pennycock has already said when he was at Select Committee that it's going to be more difficult than they thought. Well, who knew?
What in your view are the obstacles, though, to more houses being built?
Well, the principal one is planning. Planning the system at the moment is, it is just not fit for purpose. And it's good that Labour's saying we should revise it. The thing is, saying something and doing it are two different things. And we keep trying to reform it, planning. We keep trying to change it to make it looking for some silver bullet. Personally, I think it's more about resourcing than reform. And if people here will be experienced in the situation where you've got an application, it's been in for a number of months, the person who's looking after the application, the planning officer, works 2 days a week, they only look at it on a Tuesday and a Wednesday, and then they go off sick or on extended leave, somebody else takes over, they have a different perspective. That is not conducive to a rapid process of getting planning applications through. Now, what Labour's principal things they're going to do about that is going to put about 46 million quid a year into 300 more planning officers, but most of those will be entry level. They're also going to allow for a higher recovery of planning fees, which again, I'm not against either, and I think most people would pay a bit more to get a quicker delivery in terms of planning, but this is a very complex process to try and improve, and it's under-resourced. And the move to unitary authorities, which has happened in my area, which is going to be imposed upon the whole country. There'll be a white paper out next week, devolution white paper. So devolution to elected mayors in the area, in everybody's areas, right across England. Again, I'm not against, but the quid pro quo will be you've got to have it become a unitary authority, single tier. So the districts will go, and all the planning authorities are in the districts. So that's a big change, which just happened to us in North Yorkshire, and it slowed planning down. It hasn't accelerated.
Really?
So that's the number one thing. Also, just in terms of capacity, house builder capacity, we're reliant on a small number of big builders. SME house builders have been pretty much pushed out of the marketplace, largely because of shortage of land and shortage of finance. So those are all things that are difficult in terms of accelerating the housing supply. I think there are solutions. I don't think Labour's got the right solutions yet. We've got some things we'd like to bring forward we think really could make a big difference. But there's no silver bullet. You've got to get the reformers right, but more importantly, you've got to resource it properly.
Obviously, a lot of the house builders fell out of love with your party. I mean, Steve Morgan, who was a long-time contributor to the Conservatives, came round and actually endorsed Labour before the election. Are you having conversations on a sort of party basis with house builders? Are you rebuilding that relationship?
Yeah, I don't know if Steve's here today, is he? I don't know what he thinks today, but a lot of people have got some buyer's remorse, I think, in terms of that. I mean, listen, I quite understand the business will work with the party of the day. We were obviously going to lose. We deserve to lose. There's no sour grapes for me. So I understand why people, basically were willing to take the olive branch from Labour in terms of saying what would happen after the election. Fine. Okay, but there's a lot of things being brought forward people didn't expect. And when you had a fully funded, fully costed manifesto, and suddenly there's apparently 40 billion a year they need to raise in taxes, I'm sure it's a shock to a lot of people. So it'll be interesting to see what people think now. I think we got some things wrong in some of the policies we brought forward. We talked about some earlier, probably in terms of renters reform, but also in terms of basically abandoning mandatory housing targets. I thought that was a mistake. I think you've got to make sure that every part of the country delivers. And I know lots of house builders were a bit disappointed by that. And that's just politics at times. So, again, we've got to make sure that the load is spread fairly across the country, but also everybody delivers on the requirements to build homes. So I'm sure, hopefully, we'll be able to... we're speaking to house builders, and it's a long road for us to come back. So that engagement will be more frequent over time as we get closer to 2029. But in the meantime, they'll be focusing on trying to make sure the government does the right things. They're not going to be against some of the things the government's talking about. Some more strategic planning, special plans, this kind of stuff it could deliver more homes. One thing I would say, though, is I don't think the problems that we've got in the housing market in terms of housing to purchase are just about building more homes. I mean, if there's an economic benefit to the economy by building more homes, of course there is. But the natural activity that happens, the transaction, people building them, the transaction afterwards, the sale of white goods afterwards, all those kind of things are clearly good for the economy. But if one of the principal challenges in the marketplace is affordability of housing to purchase, then I don't think building 1.5 million homes in this parliament is going to solve that. And we've got a real problem around that. With capitalism, we should be the part where the party of home ownership, the part where we represent the capital side of the economy. And there's an expression an old African proverb that says, if you don't welcome young people into the village, they will burn it down just to feel its warmth. And if we want to talk to people about capitalism, and they can't acquire any or accumulate capital, then they're not going to be particularly interested in that discussion. So we've got to make it easier for young people to get onto the housing ladder. Now, have you seen what Labour's done so far? They've increased stamp duty for first-time buyers, the threshold down from 425 down to 300. Pretty much abandoned right to buy or made it far less generous. All their affordable housing mix, we moved it towards affordable houses to purchase, shared ownership, first homes, if it's discount market sale. And they're basically saying to councils, no, you won't have those targets anymore, you can deliver what you want. And that will mean more affordable homes to rent. So if we're trying to solve the problem of how we get young people on the housing ladder, that's not going the right way. And speaking a bit selfishly from our perspective as a Conservative, our vote share amongst young people in 2010, among 18 to 24-year-olds, we got 30% of that vote. Same as Labour, same as Lib Dems. Today, 5% of that vote. So, and that's partially, some of that's to do with Brexit, because the opportunities might be seen as fewer opportunities in terms of working and travelling abroad, but some of it is about getting on the housing ladder. That's the young people's number one domestic priority. So that's a problem we're going to solve. You're not simply going to solve it by building 1.5 million homes, because that just is not enough to bring house prices down. Nor is that a particularly good conversation from a member of parliament in his local town hall to say, hey, I've got some great news for you. We're going to build all these homes locally and your prices are going to fall.
Yes.
So you've got to have other interventions.
I mean, the other side of the supply and demand equation, of course, is the demand side, it's household formation. There are indications that started under your administration and continuing under the new one, there are signs that you get the sense that the government's getting to grips with illegal migration to an extent. We've had, some of the deals that were done with Albania, for example, other similar arrangements are promised. I mean, if that happens, do we actually need that many new homes? If household formation tails off because of reduced migration?
Yeah. And listen, we've got to get a handle on migration. I don't think we've got it at all at the moment. Right. I mean, you've seen the numbers out yesterday, legal migration at over 900,000. Okay, it's dropping now, 20% reduction, but still way too high. 700,000 even this year, it's just way, way too high. And actually, illegal migration is above last year's numbers right now, and above 2022's numbers, which we got a significant reduction of from in 2023. So I don't think we've got a handle on it. Now, we absolutely need to do. That number's way, way too high. Chris Philp, yesterday, who's a Shadow Home Secretary, said that number needs to be, way less than half that. He said 350,000 was a previous levels prior to pandemic. Used to be way below that figure. So you can guess where it's going to go, although there's no specific number yet. But so that's definitely going to be more under control. Illegal migration is much tougher. And you need a tough response to it, and I don't think the response we've got right now is going to work. Smashing the gangs isn't going to work. You're going to play whack-a-mole like we have in the drug industry for 50 years. So that's still going to continue. So there will be still that problem to an extent, because it'll take time to get that glide path down. But the other thing Labour have done, they've moved from household formations as the basic model to how you calculate housing need, and they moved to housing stock. So the calculations changed anyway, and on top of that, an affordability element, multiplier. So the whole calculation is different. So housing is going to go into places where there's lots of housing already. That's the kind of way you're going to be, which isn't all that sensible, because you've got loads of houses in Liverpool, and you haven't got very high house prices in lots of part of Liverpool. So it doesn't quite add up all that. But also there's been a kind of a change in terms of some of the rural areas. You see massive increases in targets, where the urban uplift in housing numbers has gone, which is protecting places like London. So it's definitely, people seem to look at us and think, oh, but all the parties are all the same these days. I think hopefully people can see there's a load of blue water between us and the Labour Party in terms of how we deal with these issues.
You touched just now on stamp duty. I mean, whenever I talk to economists, I quite often say to them, is there one thing that the government could do to improve productivity, to just give the economy a shot in the arm, and invariably they say, abolish stamp duty.
Yeah.
The government's just raised it. Why is I mean, as someone who's been in government, why is the Treasury so addicted to stamp duty? They must see the sort of deleterious impact it has on growth.
Yeah. Well, there's 11 billion reasons why they so, our balance, our deficit right now, if you're going to get rid of 11 billion quid's worth of revenue, you're going to have to find it somewhere else. So, and yet, of course, you can make the argument. I think James cleverly, in his kind of pitch to become leader, said he's going to scrap stamp duty. And wouldn't everybody like to do that? Because clearly, you don't tax something you want to happen. Transaction is you're taxing a transaction. That can't be good. But you're going to find another way to bring the same amount of money in. And nobody's found a quick fix. Everybody's talked about maybe you should reverse it so the seller's paying it because they've got the cash or whatever. Or obviously it used to be this kind of slab tax, and now it's kind of more. There's a smoother glide path, which means it's much higher at the higher end of the scale. So nobody's quite got a solution to all that yet. And of course, you'd like to scrap it, but you've got to do that you've got to put that in a context of how you restructure the economy as a whole in terms of how it operates and how the tax system incentivizes certain things. I do think it's interesting. One thing I probably surprised a lot of people is I got this job at all, having been in the housing market for 30 years. Why would they put somebody new about housing in a shadow housing secretary? And the other thing is probably out there is thinking, what's his life expectancy? It's not generally been very long in the past in terms of this job. But I think Kemi, genuinely, she wants to break the system. She doesn't want the system to break us. And I think if you have some experience in certain sectors, you're much more likely to be able to break the system. So I think what she'll come up with, some radical thinking around could be taxation, maybe in this space, another space, but also how we make sure we fix some of the problems that are there that are just not being fixed, some of which I alluded to earlier on things like housing affordability.
So how rapidly do you think, under your new leader, you're going to be coming up with an offer and a sort of policy platform, and in particular in areas like housing?
I think realistically, it's not going to be months, it's going to be years, because you're going to want to present this stuff as you lead it to an election. But, I mean, Kemi's already come out with certain policies, the reversal of things like agricultural property relief. So she's talked about those things, which obviously the family farms tax. So there'll be some things that come out. And I thought, that the Shadow Home Secretary yesterday came out with some stuff that was interesting on migration. So there will be some drip of policies. But I think in terms of how we reform planning, for example, how we make sure what number of homes we need to deliver, what mix of homes we need to deliver, I think you probably are talking 2027, 2028, lead up to elections.
And how would you characterise your relationship with Mr. Pennycook? I mean, I've known you a while now, and you've always struck me as being a sort of fairly collaborative chap.
Yeah.
Is that an approach that might be reciprocated by the government?
Sure. Well, we'll see how collaborative I am with Angela Rayner. I'm crossing swords with her on Monday. But yeah, I mean, I think, listen, everybody, in my mind, everybody goes into politics. A vast majority of people go into politics to try and do the right thing. And Matthew's a really decent guy. So is Johnny Reynolds. So Angela Rayner is. I'm not sure she really gets to the whole property market, but I think she's in it for the right reasons. So yeah, of course we'll collaborate where we can, and work together where we can. But there'll be points of ideological difference. And I talked about some of them earlier, things like affordable homes to purchase, getting people on the property ladder. But yeah, where we can, we'll try and make the case behind the scenes as well as forcefully in front of it.
Where might there be common ground?
Well, I think in terms of supply, I think we all want to see more supply, and I think that's right that we do that. I think in terms of making sure that the rented sector is well regulated, I'm not against things like a decent home standard if it's done in the right way and there's the proper levels of accountability. I think so that there's a space for good regulation, but not, so things like that we can work together on. My feeling is they're more likely to introduce regulation that goes over the top. And to me, things like ROPA, regulation of property agents, which I'll be watching down the track, I'm totally against that. I don't know if Kemi's be totally against it, so I might have stepped outside my remit here, but I think Labour will probably jump to that. But
yeah, I mean, you can see why it's an easy sell to an electorate that's, rightly or wrongly sceptical about agents. Well,
again, in my view, the industry's far more accountable and delivers better service than it's ever done. It's largely because it's competitive, and we all trade on our reputations in our localities. No more so than this industry, because you put your name above the door. Most of the people out there have got their own names above the door and live in those communities as well as work in them. So, and the property ombudsmans, I think the redress schemes have had brought a significant benefit in terms of consumer outcomes. But it's done in a way that's relatively light touch in terms of regulation. So that is an example of ex post regulation after the fact. You set the rules. If something goes wrong, somebody's got somewhere to go to. If we move to a ROPA-style approach, that's like the FCA. So you let the FCA, you know what the FCA is like. The FCA for a state agency. Now the FCA, the combined budget of the FCA and the Financial Ombudsman Service is £1 billion a year. 10,000 people. If you're going to get people coming around to your offices checking every file to make sure you've done your money laundering checks or where else you've done your ID checks, whatever else you've done, or you've got your material information, which is another thing I've got a major hang-up about, then you can end up with armies of box tickers, which is going to add cost to the industry. Now, some people there will be thinking, well, that's good because it's a barrier to entry for other new competition. And that's true. But it's not good out for consumers. So there are some regulations that are beneficial. Support the redress schemes totally, but going further than that, having this blanket ex-ante regulation with lots of people ticking boxes and coming around your offices like HMRC do on some of your money laundering is not right. There are some real opportunities with regulation. One of the things we were doing is bringing forward some legislation that would transform the property market in terms of transaction times. So years ago, we'd done something called open banking, which again you're familiar with, which allows, basically, it was there to allow people to switch bank accounts more quickly, but actually it just meant that lots of new fintech applications were built on the back of it, because it made the banks make their data, all your transactions, interoperable with other banks and with other sources like zero accounting systems and things. So it made this fantastic opportunity to do all kinds of things like reconcile your bank account automatically. That all happens because of open banking. Yeah. Massive success. And what we want to do is bring that in right across the economy, to telecoms, to energy, to fuel, all kinds of things. But one of the things I push for, because it was under my brief as business minister, is home buying and selling. So make your records, make your conveyances records, make the land registry records all open and interoperable. So, the mortgage company, so, and in some trials of this, the 6 months it takes currently for a transaction, 6 months is down to about a month and a half. So what an opportunity that is. So that's the kind of regulation that we should move to, that really takes some of these steps away, that cause people to think twice about moving house in the first place. I can't be bothered. It's the second most stressful thing you can do after dying or divorcing or something. So really some opportunities there.
Yeah, but I mean, all of that notwithstanding, is it your belief still that ROPA is actually going to put some agents out of business if it's fully implemented as the government wants? Well,
I mean, I think it'll only put agents out of business who are not willing to embrace it, because all the provisions are all, they're all, anybody can cope with them if they want to put the effort in to do it. So some people might think, oh, that's just too much hassle, I can't be bothered. That's not what I'm worried about, really. I'm worried about new competition and those people thinking, oh, I'm not going to go into this, which is bad for consumers. So that's what I'm more worried about, that this becomes a huge bureaucracy that really puts up prices for consumers. That's what will happen. All regulations are paid for by consumers, not for businesses. But, it's all taxes are paid for by consumers.
Yeah.
Because when you invest your money or borrow your money to then invest, you need a return on that capital, and that needs to pay off the interest on that capital, or on the provided return. Then you need a risk element, a risk premium, and then you've got your other costs. The capital cost, the interest cost, and the risk premium don't change. Everything else goes onto the price of the consumer.
Yeah.
So, and it's the same with regulation as with taxes. But I don't think some of our counterparts in the Labour government quite understand that.
Just to go back to the Renters' Rights Bill, I mean, there is a view afoot that this is really an attempt to introduce rent controls by the back door. Do you worry that the government might at some point try to do so more explicitly? I mean, obviously, you've got people like Sadiq Khan who argue for it.
It'll have to do, because, as I said before, otherwise you're going to use the loopholes within that to get people out. Okay, you can go to a tribunal, a first-tier tribunal, to appeal against a rent increase, but a lot of people won't do that. They'll just decide to leave if they show the rent up. So it will be, all these hard cases are raised in Parliament. Oh my God, this is terrible. If this rent's been put up by 10%, or average rents are going this year, let's put rent controls in place. As night follows day, that will happen. As night follows day, they'll close the loophole about be able to sell that house and move tenants out as a result of you want to sell the house. As night follows day, it'll be you can't reoccupy unless you're going to find that tenant in a new house, because that's where it was before. And the people who remember the 1980s remember that, because you've got to close those loopholes. So you're seeing that already in Scotland. You're seeing, and as I say, other jurisdictions like London, they're looking for those kind of things, like that's some kind of quick fix. And you all know, of course, it'll just commute supply, because you can't get the return on investment.
And what do you think the government's thinking is on right to buy? I mean, there are indications that they really, really want to make it very, very difficult for council tenants to buy their home.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't surprise me at all, but it's quite galling when Angela Rayner herself benefited from right to buy and got a very big discount through it, and now he wants to say to people, no, that was okay for me, but I don't want you to have it because we need to... I'll say one thing and do another. That's quite a common feature you'll find. So yes, their belief is we should keep people in rented accommodation. And that's some ideology there, which I don't agree with. I think allowing right to buy is another way to help people on low incomes get onto the housing ladder, just like shared ownership is, just like first homes was, discount market sale. So to me, that's a right policy. I don't have a problem with one-for-one replacement, so you build one as you sell one. But if you remember back into the Thatcher era, we all talk about this right to buy that Thatcher brought forward. We had a massive problem in terms of the renovation of all that stock. That was the problem. How are we going to afford to renovate all this stock? So they partially came up with the wheeze, well, let's sell them to the people who live in them. And, you know, in my local community, but the same in a lot of people here, those properties, many of which are quite dilapidated and uncared for, now are beautiful homes. The double glazing has been put in, the extensions, the garages, the gardens look immaculate. Those areas have really come up a few notches on the back of that, because people really will take care of a home they own. But we've all seen examples of social housing where that is not the case.
And very briefly, because I know you have a hard stop, you have places to go, but just to return to the unitary authorities aspiration that the government has, what is that going to do to construction of social housing by local government?
Well, I think in terms of the planning issues, the biggest thing, you make sure planning still works. So as it's the teething troubles is the biggest issue. Whether there's planning authorities that have been there a while, the districts usually are better in terms of delivering on planning, in my experience, than a unitary locally. I think there's opportunities to increase house building, because you're going to have combined authorities, so you're cooperating over a number of different, what will currently be districts, and it will be a number of different counties working together in terms of those unitary authorities. It will mean a transfer of some of that stuff that should be built in certain areas, in other areas. In my example, York, who hasn't had a local plan since 1956, will be trying to move, and never agreed on the numbers they should be delivering annually. I've under-delivered. Their uplift in terms of the targets have increased by 20%, North Yorkshire up by 310%. You're going to see a lot of that housing needs shifted from those urban areas into rural areas, because they're easier to develop homes on green fields rather than brownfield. Yeah,
right. Before I let you go, one last one. Is it nice not to be having to talk about the post office constantly?
Actually, it was great to be able to do something that I'd taken interest in as a backbencher, that had been such a horrendous series of events and the impact on those people. So you come in this job because you want to fix some stuff, and you know, it's a no-win game, so not everybody thinks you fixed it in the right way, but we made some big changes there, and there was a fourfold increase in the amount of compensation paid out over the last 12 months. 100 million we'd paid out a year ago, it's now about 438 million. So real steps forward, exonerated, quashed the convictions of about 700 people. So to do that was a massive privilege. So no, I loved my time and my opportunity working with the Post Office.
Very good. Well, I know you've got to get off. Kevin, great pleasure to talk to you as ever.
Thanks, Ian.
Please give him a round of applause.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Great. As ever.